By the fourth night after the first hard frost, she had gone without a full meal for nearly 2 days, and behind her, under the porch, two half-grown kits were waiting for a feeding that had not come. The trash can that had fed her all through the fall sat exactly where it always sat, in the gap between the fence and the tool shed. But something new closed over the lid now, a bright metal latch, cold under her paws, that gave no matter how many times she pulled. There is a raccoon working in your yard tonight, and there is a very good chance you built the thing standing between her and her next meal on purpose. What matters here is that somewhere near you, right now, an animal built almost entirely around her front paws is running her fingers over a lock designed by an engineer who never once had to solve it in the dark, with two hungry mouths waiting, in freezing air, with claws instead of hands. Stay with this one, because the last few minutes of her story changed the way I look at the latch on my own back door, and by the end you will understand exactly what she was doing on the third night. The thing no company selling raccoon-proof hardware wants you to know. She had been at this address longer than the family living in the house realized. Her mother had denned 2 yards over, in the crawl space under a shed nobody used, and by the following spring she had struck out on her own the way most young females do, looking for a stretch of yard nobody else had already claimed. She found it 3 streets away, a quiet corner lot with a wooden deck, a leaning chain-link fence along the back property line, and most importantly, a metal trash can that the family living there rarely latched all the way. Nights here had a rhythm. She would drop down from the oak at the edge of the yard, cross the grass low and fast, and go straight to the gap behind the shed where the can stood in shadow, half hidden from the porch light. Getting the lid off wasn't hunting, exactly. It was closer to unlocking a door she already knew the shape of, front paws braced on the rim, weight shifted back, a slow twisting pull until the lid gave. Between the can and the den, she kept a short private map of the yard that had nothing to do with the family sleeping inside the house. The loose board at the base of the deck stairs, where beetles gathered after rain. The low spot by the koi pond, where the mud stayed soft enough to dig for worms even in a dry week. The chain-link fence line where a gap wide enough for her, but not for anything bigger, let her slip between this yard and the next without ever crossing open lawn. None of it was written down anywhere except in her own memory, and none of it needed to be. She had walked the same 6 or 7 points so many nights in a row that her body found them without her thinking about it at all, the way you find a light switch in your own house with the lights off. Her paws are not built like anything else that visits your yard after dark. Almost a third of the surface of a raccoon's brain devoted to touch is given over entirely to her front feet, more concentrated sensation, per square inch, than almost any other mammal that shares a street with people. She does not merely feel an object. In the wet, in the dark, she reads it, the way you might read a page with your eyes closed, running each finger over raised print. People have watched raccoons do this for 200 years and reached the wrong conclusion almost every time, assuming that when she dips something into water at the edge of a pond, she is washing her food, scrubbing it clean the way a person might at a sink. She isn't. Wet skin on her front paws grows more sensitive, not less, and dipping something into water is closer to putting on a better pair of gloves than doing laundry. The word most people use for her kind, ladder, literally means the washer. 200 years of watching the wrong hypothesis and never once correcting it. By midsummer, she had kits of her own, denned in a hollow at the base of the old oak, and her nights stopped being just about her. Everything she brought back from that can, everything she found in the gutter or under the bird feeder 3 doors down, went first to 2 small mouths waiting in the dark. Once, testing a stone jar half full of water with a treat floating just out of reach, she worked out, after several minutes of trying to simply reach in with a paw, that dropping stones in one at a time raised the water high enough to lift the food to where she could take it. Wildlife researchers have run something close to that same test in a lab and watched other raccoons find the same kind of answer, some inventing entirely different solutions of their own, tipping the container itself rather than filling it. It isn't the kind of thinking that looks like a human plan. It's closer to a mind that keeps trying new angles on a problem until one of them works and remembers the one that did. The rhythm held through July, through August, through the first cool nights of September, when the leaves started to turn and she began, without quite knowing why, to eat more than she needed, laying down the fat she would live on through the coldest stretch of winter, when she would not truly hibernate, only sleep for days at a time in a hollow and wake hungry, needing exactly this can, exactly this yard to still be here. Then, in October, the family who owned the can decided they were tired of the mess. They had seen the tipped-over lid one morning too many, and they had done what a lot of homeowners do the moment they decide an animal is a problem instead of a neighbor. They went out and bought something advertised as raccoon-proof. A new can, a spring-loaded latch, a mechanism built by a person who had tested it against exactly 0 actual raccoons before printing the label. The first night, she tried the same twisting pull that had worked for 6 months, and the lid did not move. She tried again, lower, hooking one paw under the rim the way she always had. Nothing gave. She circled the can twice, pressed her whole body against the side of it, and eventually left with nothing, back to a den where 2 kits were still waiting in the cold. The second night was colder than the first, and she came back anyway, because a food source she has used all season is not something she abandons on the first failure. In the studies researchers have actually run, raccoons that solved a mechanical puzzle once have been shown to remember the correct sequence for close to a year afterward. She was not going to let one new latch erase 6 months of a working answer that easily. She stayed at that can longer than she should have, longer than most nights allowed, and the extra minutes cost her something. Somewhere above the tree line, an owl that hunted this stretch of yards on quiet nights had already noticed a shape holding still in one place for too long. Her ears caught the change in the air before her eyes found anything, a stillness in the leaves that hadn't been there a moment before, and she froze against the side of the can, low and small, until whatever had been watching decided she wasn't worth the effort and moved on. It cost her nearly 10 minutes she didn't have. She went back to the latch anyway. What she did on the third night is the part almost nobody sees, because it happens in complete silence, 30 feet from a lit window, while the people inside are already asleep. She did not force the latch. She read it, one paw tracing the seam where the lid met the rim, the other finding the spring mechanism itself, feeling for the give in it the way she might feel for a soft spot in bark hiding a beetle underneath. Researchers at a university lab once built something close to this on purpose, a box fitted with 13 different mechanical locks, each requiring its own sequence of pulls and twists to open. The raccoons in that study solved 11 of the 13. When the researchers turned the same locks upside down afterward, changed their position, made the familiar unfamiliar on purpose, most of the raccoons solved them again, faster the second time, and many still remembered the solution close to a year later. Her latch was simpler than that box, but the tool she was using on it was the same one: patient, tactile, unhurried problem-solving, not force, not luck. It took her 4 nights, working in short bursts between calls to check on the den, before her paw finally found the exact pressure point that released the spring, and the lid came free in her hands. But 4 nights of a tipped can and a raccoon circling the yard after dark had already done something else. It had convinced the family that this particular animal was becoming aggressive, bold, a problem worth calling someone about. The morning after she finally solved the latch, there was a truck in the driveway with a company name on the side, and a conversation happening on the porch about a trap. What saved her that week was not luck. It was the fact that cities have been quietly running an experiment on raccoons for decades without meaning to, and she was one of its better results. Researchers studying urban raccoons in Toronto found that animals living in cities solve puzzle feeders faster and more reliably than raccoons living in the surrounding countryside, bolder, more persistent, willing to keep trying a mechanism long after a wild raccoon might have walked away. The very qualities that made her frustrating enough to call a company about were the same qualities a decade of city living had sharpened in her. And by the time the truck pulled out of the driveway that afternoon without a trap ever being set, the family had decided, for reasons they could not fully explain, to just buy a second latch instead. She solved that one too, eventually. Slower this time because the mechanism was different again, but the pattern in her front paws, the seam, the give, the pressure point, was a pattern now, not a single lucky guess. And 3 winters later, long after that first pair of kits had grown and scattered to yards of their own, she came back to a ken behind a different fence, in a yard she had not visited in over a year, and solved the latch on it in a single night. The people who lived there never knew that the animal at their bin had once solved almost the same lock 2 addresses away, or that what looked like instinct was actually memory, doing exactly what memory is built to do. There is a raccoon working a latch in your yard tonight, and she is not failing to get into your bin. She is somewhere in the middle of solving it, the same patient way she has solved every version of it before, and there is a real chance the next one you buy will only teach her the shape of a slightly different lock. Most people hear a tipped-over can at 2 in the morning and think chaos. You know now that it's closer to the sound of someone finishing their homework. And the next time you find a bin lid open with no mess anywhere near it, you will know exactly what happened in your yard while you were asleep. Not an animal that got lucky, but one that remembered. I would love to know if you have ever changed your bin, your latch, your lock, and watched a raccoon solve the new version anyway. Tell me in the comments. I read every one. I will see you in the next one.